The 1960s for me were some of the most important years of my life. There was a lot going on, obviously, and when you think about 1968 specifically, Martin Luther King is assassinated in April, Bobby Kennedy in June, the Chicago riots, the Paris riots, the Prague Spring. 1968, man, was out of control. It's when the public really stood up to try to evoke social change. I think it's important to care about history, to know where we come from, the mistakes we made. It certainly can be used, and I think it can be abused, history, and I think we've seen it used and abused against this generation. The future is the world, and the great world of possibilities. I'm Emilio Estevez, and this has been my take on history.
I'm really obsessed with the Donner Party for a number of reasons. There's a lot to do with, I think, how difficult it was to settle America, how difficult it was to actually create the frontier. So there was all these risks involved with going over this pass, and these settlers had bought this guide called the Hastings Guide to travel over the mountains. And the Hastings Guide basically gave people a shortcut over the Sierra Mountains. When they finally got there, they realized the shortcut didn't exist, that it was actually just a way to sell maps. So the Donner Party were stuck in the mountains. They were not properly prepared for all of the snow. They were not properly prepared for any of this stuff. So it's just all these families who were just waiting out the winter, trying to make a life there, trying to survive, even though they didn't know how to live in this harsh environment. And so they ended up having to eat each other. It's an incredible story. I'm Margaret Cho, and this has been my take on history.
How has history affected my life? The fact that Britain moved into India, which created a whole relationship between India and England, and that led to a mass immigration from India into England in the 1960s, which my father was part of. Something that really fascinates me as an actor in regards to history is when you get a script, you read that your character says a particular line and does a particular action. And so as an actor, what you do is you use your imagination to create a history for your character so that you can understand why the present exists. He who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. George Orwell. He who gets to write the textbooks gets to decide what are the moral values we live on right now, what are the choices that we get to make at this particular moment. Does that make sense? I'm Ravi Kapoor, and this has been my take on history.
It's interesting. When I was a kid and in school, I was really interested in history, and I graduated from college a semester early because of AP American History. Yay! I personally am fascinated by moments in history when somebody decides that the prevailing wisdom around them, the society around them, isn't operating correctly. So when people put their lives on the line to help other people, I'm impressed and moved by that. It's pretty special. I watch the History Channel with my dad, and I'm not going to lie, he's fascinated with dictators. So I know a lot about Hitler, probably more than I would have otherwise, and I know a lot about Marcos and Allende. I mean, my dad's fascinated by history, and it rubs off. I watch the shows, and I think, well, you know, it makes sense that he's fascinated. This is pretty fascinating stuff. And I'm not really allowed to change the channel. I'm Rex Lee, and this has been my take on history.
I think every human being on this planet should know their history. We learn a lot of things about who we are. We learn how messed up we've been. I think we learn tolerance from history. I think we learn as a race of humans have been very hateful and destructive. And if we could correct that for the future, maybe we'd all be better off. But history shows that we have gotten better as a human race. I'm Donald Faison, and this has been my take on history.
Imelda Marcos fascinates me because she's a real figure of ridicule in America. She had a lot of shoes. This was like sort of a big deal sort of to talk about her incredible excess, her greed. In a sense, like I always looked at her as being, oh, well, she must be this really like demonic figure. I think that, you know, you could go into any first lady's closet and see just as many shoes. I think there are lots of shoe shopping crimes amongst any political family, so I don't know if Imelda Marcos is necessarily such a tyrant. Supposedly, the story goes, Imelda Marcos in the 60s kidnapped the Beatles and had them under house arrest in the Philippines and would not let them leave the country until they performed for her. Who knows if this is true or not, but we never know. I'm Margaret Cho, and this has been my take on history.